Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Hi, welcome. Glad to see everybody. Today, a big part of our discussion, because we've reached the last section of the Maha Satipatthana Sutta. We've reached the Noble Eightfold Path. And I'm excited to talk about this. I got to say, I think that one of the things I struggle with the most as a guy who clearly identifies as Buddhist is how Buddhism is so misunderstood, like in and of itself. Like we've been seeing kind of as we unfold these teachings. And one of those misunderstandings, I think, is this kind of sense when people are new, when they come in and they're like, I'm going to have to go off into a mountain and find a guru. And then if I shave my head and I sit real still for a really long time, then I'll gain some superhuman ability. And I don't think that's actually in any of the discussion that we really talked about here. I mean, and we'll see that today. What the Buddha's been talking about, what Siddhartha was talking about from the beginning, was looking directly at your life and what you see and what is real, and saying, if we examine what is real, what does that tell us about how we can live a happy life? Like, that's pretty straightforward, actually. There's not a lot of mystic in there. And yesterday I was talking to our teacher, Ben, and I said, hey, Ben, is there anything that you think I ought to add when I'm talking about this? And he said, well, I think it's important to understand that the Buddha never read anything. The Buddha never, nobody ever sat down on Saturdays with Siddhartha and went through this and said, okay, here's what I think. And then he said, okay, I think that. He went and looked directly to examine and just held to this course of what should I examine until he unlocked a deep understanding. And so Ben said, you either are on the Arya path or you are not. And that depends on whether or not you're looking. And Arya, you may recall, is the word we said noble. So the Noble Eightfold Path here today. As we look at this, the discussion is, what is this way that we can be on what's the path for our life? Given what we've learned, what is the best path for us to take? So we'll recall that what we're looking at here is the four foundations of mindfulness practice. This is the Maha Satipatthana Sutta. So the discussion begins with the Buddha pointing out these things that we all experience and how we can observe deeply mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of the mind, and mindfulness of mental qualities. And that these are things that are real, that we all experience, and that they have some tendencies that are uniform, that they arise, that they stick around for a while, and then they pass away. And that there are conditions that cause them to arise, and conditions that cause them to stick around or not, and conditions that eventually cause them, no matter what, to pass away. And so he said, turn that mindfulness towards the deep questions of life, and you start to see that dukkha is really a universal problem that is the fundamental issue for just about for everybody. And that dukkha is this sense of pain or discomfort, this suffering that we experience in our life that is kind of like an empty space or a hole, or where something just doesn't quite fit. And we looked at how this is like a bumpy ride you get if the axle doesn't fit the wheel on a cart. But that dukkha, this suffering that we experience, is fundamental, first noble truth. And then we looked at tanha, that this word meant to thirst, and it was the thing that drives dukkha, that the suffering that we experience is driven by this thirst that we all do experience, where we feel like we really ought to be out doing something or fixing something, or there's something we can't have, or there's something that we have that we don't want, or we have something great and then we lose it and we wish we didn't. And so tanha, craving or thirst, is the root of that dukkha. So then the question becomes, okay, so what do we do about that thirst that is causing our dukkha? How do we go about, if we're going to try to figure out how to go about living our lives? And of course, this is kind of a big question if you're, ascetic in the time of the Buddha and you're wandering around with all these practitioners. They're all trying to figure out what is the best course of life that's going to get me the most supreme results. And so he says, what's the path? And this brings us to the first section of the text where we left off and where we pick up. And what is the noble truth of the path of practice leading to the cessation of stress? Just this very noble eightfold path: right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Just really simple as that. Now, in some ways, that is actually seems pretty straightforward, and then it has its complexity. But I think that one of those things about Buddhism that gets misunderstood, like I said at the top, is this idea that there is a path with steps, kind of like you see here. And that you first gain you step on the first step and then you get a little higher up every time you take a step. And that isn't truly how the Noble Eightfold Path unfolds. In fact, what we're really talking about is the way that, life unfolds in front of us. And so the question becomes, what do we do about this? And the terms right resolve, right action, right speech, right mindfulness come about. And that brings us to the word sama. The Pali word sama, which we translate as right or correct, comes from the root sam. This root suggests ideas like together or properly. In Buddhism, particularly in the Noble Eightfold Path, sama means doing things in a way that is completely correct or in complete harmony. It emphasizes the importance of aligning our actions, thoughts, and efforts with the truths taught by the Buddha. So, understanding this path a little bit differently, first, the idea is that we're not talking about this is the elite ascetic path. He's saying that this is the correct path. This is the skilled path. But right and correct to do what? Well, to align you with nature, with those four foundations that we've been looking at. We already noticed some things about when we started looking at the nature of our body and how it arises and passes away, the nature of our thoughts and our feelings and how they arise and pass away. So to come into alignment with that would be to fully understand and be in harmony with it. And that is sama. So the Noble Eightfold Path, I'm going to try to pronounce it correctly, Aryo Antangiko Mago. The Noble Eightfold Path. Aryo means noble or honorable. Atangiko means eightfold or consisting of 8 parts. And Mago means path. But it may be better to use my analogy here of origami, because it doesn't really unfold as a path. Life doesn't really unfold really like one step after the other exactly, does it? And so it's more like this example of origami, of folding in on itself, where you take something simple and as you see how it's folded, then you can make it a much more complicated thing. So also unwrapping a complicated thing can be similar, but we see that the path is a way, folds in on itself. These things compound. And so one of the things that we see is the idea of it's not really like you gain right view and then you gain right action. They're not steps one after another, but rather things that fold in on themselves to make a new, bigger whole picture. I hope that makes sense. That's my metaphor. So the first step in the Noble Eightfold Path is right view. And what I've done here is, while quoting the text that we've been doing, there's different translations on this that may be helpful. Some people use the translation right view. Some use the translation right understanding, and some use the translation right perspective. From our translation, it says, and what is right view? Knowledge with regard to stress, knowledge with regard to the origination of stress, knowledge with regard to the cessation of stress, knowledge with regard to the way of practice leading to the cessation of stress. This is called right view. So we talked about it. Knowledge with regard to dukkha. And what causes our dukkha? Tanha, clinging and thirst. And if you can see that, then you can see how one thing is connected to another is connected to another. And that brings me to one of the few talks, public talks that I attended that Longpa Chali gave. And he said, right view is like a train. He said, right view is like the locomotive. He said, as once you have right view, all the other factors come into line right behind it. But right view pulls the train. And I think that's a perfect analogy. What he's saying here, what the Buddha is saying is understanding fully that there is dukkha. The dukkha is caused by tanha, clinging and thirst. That there is a way that that originates. That there's a way that it ceases. That there is a path that helps to that ceasing. That is right view. All right. Then let's talk about the second step. Sama sankappa. Right intention, right thought, or right resolve. And what is right resolve? Aspiring to renunciation, to freedom from ill will, to harmlessness. This is called right resolve. So this is a very simple human thing that I think we all do. Once you understand in the first step that clinging is causing you suffering, well, you kind of want to cling less. When you see something that's, if you're holding a hot potato, you decide, hey, I think I want to hold that hot potato less as soon as you realize it's burning you, and you let it go. So part of this is just setting the resolve to say, I'm going to let go of the things that are causing suffering to me or others. And that means that I'm going to let go of ill will because I don't want to cause suffering in others, and I want to live a more harmless life. This does not require a mountain in India. This just requires that the next time you bump into somebody and have an opportunity to be mad at them, you opt out. That you say, I'm going to resolve to opt out when that happens. That's right resolve. Samavecha, right speech, right communication, or proper speech. As you see, some of this finds its way right into our precepts. And what is right speech? Abstaining from lying, abstaining from divisive speech, from abusive speech, and from idle chatter. This is called right speech. Don't say mean things to people if you want a happier life. That does kind of seem like a no-brainer. Why not? Why not say mean things to people? Because those conditions, the desire to say something mean to somebody, you recognize is caused by clinging. And then you see it and you realize, boy, I'm going to be resolved that I'm not going to do that because I see that when I say something nasty to someone, it arises suffering in them. It arises suffering in me. And so if I don't do that, the suffering won't arise. And if I have done that, I should apologize so that it can cease. I'm going to abstain from lying. I'm going to abstain from saying things that might be divisive. I'm not going to be mean or abusive or harsh with my speech. And I'm not just going to sit around with idle chatter, or another good translation of this is gossip. I'm not going to sit around gossiping about other people. And that is what's called right speech. Sama kamanta, right action, right conduct, or proper action. And what is right action? Abstaining from taking life, abstaining from stealing, and abstaining from illicit sex. This is called right action. Little bit of text, a lot of bit of stuff. This is a lot of the stuff that we deal with in life. What's right action? Not doing things to harm others. Not doing things, harming others is stealing, where greed arises. Not doing things that might cause suffering in others, like raping someone or forcing them into a sexual situation they don't like, or even just having sex with somebody that because you want to and it causes them suffering. So here again, right action is really just a matter of recognizing the things we do in life and saying, will this cause suffering in others? Will this cause suffering in me? Because I know that suffering is coming from my clinging. I know that it's coming from my clinging because I can see it when I look at those 4 foundations of mindfulness. And I can see that it arises when I do this, that it sticks around and causes harm if it's going to, and then it passes away. And I don't want to do that. Right livelihood. Sama ajiva. Right livelihood, right way of living, or proper livelihood. And what is right livelihood? There's the case where a disciple of the noble ones, having abandoned dishonest livelihood, keeps his life going with right livelihood. This is called right livelihood. So this one, what an amazing, practical, real world example that the Buddha is giving here, because clearly he's not only talking to ascetics that live deep in the jungle, he's talking to normal people. And one of the best stories and examples of this, a classic in Buddhism, is the story of the butcher. And the butcher comes to the Buddha and he says, hey, I want to live with right livelihood, but I make a living by butchering animals, and that people eat meat. There's somebody's got to do this. So the Buddha recommended to him that he practice that he doesn't kill living beings from the time he gets out of work, from sunset to sunrise, or what have you. He says, can you do that? And the butcher says, yes, I can do that. He says, well, then you're practicing in the right way, because you're at least leaning in that direction. And so the Buddha recommends to the butcher that he at least practice the best livelihood that he can. Now, a lot of us, we see first responders and doctors and librarians and all the people that put our society together. And there are plenty of people. And sometimes you even need an attorney to make a right livelihood. And sometimes attorneys seem like they are making a right livelihood, and sometimes they can't. But this isn't really a matter of judging any individual person or occupation or thing. It's a matter of understanding that when you go to make a right livelihood and you want to build a life without suffering, you don't build a livelihood built on causing the suffering of others. You build a livelihood built on doing what you can to help people, to not cause suffering. This is what's called right livelihood. Sama vayama, right effort, right exertion, proper effort. And what is right effort? There is the case where a monk generates desire, endeavors, arouses persistence, upholds and exerts his intent for the sake of non-arising of evil, unskillful qualities that have not yet arisen, for the sake of abandoning of evil, unskillful qualities that have arisen, for the sake of arising of skillful qualities that have not yet arisen, and for the maintenance, non-confusion, increase, plenitude, development, and culmination of skillful qualities that have arisen. So there's a choice to be made here, says the Buddha, that we can in fact put our effort forward to developing good qualities and letting go of bad qualities. We are not conditioned beings that are wandering through space and time that are either evil or good, but rather that the conditions have come together where we can move conditions into intent. We can move the conditions towards skillful qualities. We can move them away from unskilled qualities. What does that mean? Well, if we look at our 4 foundations of mindfulness, we go back to it, we can see that there's a place where sometimes when we feel a negative emotion, or yeah, you know, a bad emotion, we cling to wishing it might be different. And we see that clinging arising to us when we're having that emotional experience. Well, that means that we could arise the skill in that moment of letting that go. That's actually a pretty big claim, but the bigger thing is you have to put the effort into doing it. It doesn't just happen. You have to actively say, I'm going to abandon these things that I see as unskilled that are causing difficulty in my life and the life of others. I'm going to put forth the effort. I'm going to not stop and just do stuff because it feels good or I'm lazy, but rather I'm really going to persevere in developing skills and qualities that have not yet arisen that will, you know, end my confusion and help me be stronger. This is called right effort. Samasati, right mindfulness, proper mindfulness, or right intention. All right, now we're starting to move into some deeper stuff as our origami folds in. We remember that we come to this eightfold path from the four foundations of mindfulness. So he says, what is right mindfulness? There's the case where a monk remains focused on the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful. Putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world, he remains focused on feelings in and of themselves, the mind in and of itself, mental qualities in and of themselves, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. This is called right mindfulness. So, our four foundations of mindfulness, remember, you got to look. And as you look, you understand these things better. You looked at our body at its different postures, at the way it'll change over time. We looked at our emotions. We looked at our mind. We looked at the mental qualities of defilements and the seven factors of enlightenment. We looked at how our body is connected to these things through the six senses. And the whole time, got to put a little energy into that. You have to be alert and you have to pay attention. And so clearly the recommendation is to be mindful of these things with ardency, with a little bit of fire in your spirit. But while you're doing that, putting aside those things that we're clinging to or pushing away with reference to the world. This is called right mindfulness. So right concentration, right meditation, and proper concentration. And what is right concentration? There is the case where a monk, quite withdrawn from sensuality, withdrawn from unskillful mental qualities, enters and remains in the first jhana, rapture and pleasure born from withdrawal, accompanied by and directed thought and evaluation. Accompanied by directed thought and evaluation. Sorry. So this is the first step that we all experience in meditation. And I want to just look at this a second and have you kind of reflect on your own practice. Pretty simple description here, without overcomplicated thinking about this. Have you ever withdrawn from the noise of the world and sat still and then seen in yourself mental qualities of wanting to run away from meditation or anxiousness or anger or anything, and seen those mental qualities and then kind of let them go and sat still for a while instead? So you just basic sitting meditation with calm and peace. And then you have a little pleasure because you're out of the world and you're just enjoying your practice. But you're still thinking and you're still evaluating things. You're still noting. You're just relaxed and sitting. I think this describes the first basic factor that we all experience in meditation, where you just relaxed and you're practicing and it just feels good. You sense stuff and you're pulling away from unskillful things and you're moving to skillful things. Level one. Then with the stilling of directed thoughts and evaluation, he enters and remains in the second jhana, rapture and pleasure born of composure, unification of awareness, free from directed thought and evaluation, internal assurance. Thought passes away. You're not sitting there, directing your thought and evaluating everything. You're just in rapture, composed with internal assurance. With the fading away of rapture, he remains equanimous, mindful, and alert, and senses pleasure with the body. Thus he enters and remains in the third jhana, of which the noble ones declare, equanimous and mindful, he has a pleasant abiding. The third jhana described as not feeling that super rapturous joy or relaxation that you experience in the first two. Those things kind of pass away, and you find yourself in a space where you're not clinging to things, nor are you pushing them away, but you are fully mindful, fully alert, and you do sense pleasure with the body. Thus he enters and remains in the third jhana. With the abandoning of pleasure and pain, as with the earlier disappearance of elation and distress, he enters and remains in the fourth jhana, purity of equanimity and mindfulness, neither pleasure nor pain. This is called right concentration. That is the description in the Maha Satipatthana Sutta of the fourth jhana, the disappearance of elation and distress, just remaining in purity of equanimity and mindfulness with neither pleasure nor pain. That is the description of right concentration. This is called the noble truth of the path of the practice leading to the cessation of stress. So we saw that by developing right view and right intention and right speech, taking right action, living a right livelihood, putting forth right effort, gains right mindfulness, and develops right concentration. The path folds in on itself to blossom. And then the last part of this section is our old friend that we looked at before, those 4 points. In this way, he remains focused internally on mental qualities in and of themselves, or externally on mental qualities in and of themselves, or both internally and externally on mental qualities in and of themselves. Practicing the jhanas, you're doing this. Practicing right intention, you're doing this. Practicing right thought, all of them are different things that help to develop that path, but that's what you're doing. In this way, you're remaining focused internally on mental qualities in and of themselves, and externally and internally and externally. You remain focused on the phenomenon that they originate with regard to mental qualities, on the phenomenon that they pass away with regard to mental qualities, or on the phenomenon that they originate and they pass away with regard to mental qualities. Or so mindfulness is that there are mental qualities, is sustained to the extent and knowledge of remembrance, and he remains independent, unsustained, not clinging to anything in the world. This is how a monk remains focused on mental qualities in and of themselves in reference to the Four Noble Truths. So to conclude, and then open up discussion, and hopefully this has elucidated the Eightfold Path for you, I just want to conclude with this quote from the great Ajahn Chah. The real Eightfold Path is 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears, a mouth, a tongue, and a body. Is the actual life you live. This is the Eightfold Path. As you sit and as you walk, you are the Eightfold Path. So the Eightfold Path is not just a list of things that you should achieve. It's not a to-do list. It can't be accomplished by checking boxes on a piece of paper. The Eightfold Path is the way that you cultivate your life to create the best conditions possible to end your suffering. And to end your suffering, we've seen you got to give up the craving and the aversion. Why do we got to give up the craving and aversion? Because it causes dukkha. Where do we see dukkha? We see it in mindfulness of the 4 foundations. And so that brings us through this full exposition that the Buddha has made about how to start looking directly where you are, to look at your garage full of stuff, to sort it into 4 different piles that you can digest and understand, to sit and go through those piles so that you fully understand how those things got into your garage, why they were there so long, how you can let them go. And by doing that, we clean out our lives and it becomes a more practically comfortable place to be with less suffering. And that is what I'll finish my talk with today and open up to discussion on the Noble Eightfold Path. I need theme music or something. Theme music missing, maybe at the end here.
It's a lot to. It's actually kind of interesting.
So much. Yes, it is a lot.
Figure out to jump in and just say there's a lot to go in there.
Yeah.
It was interesting. I was thinking about when you were commenting on idle speech. One of the interesting things that occurred to me while listening to that was the idle speech, whether it's gossip or even just simply idle speech, like "Hey, how's the weather?" Right?
Yeah.
Is that it's whenever you engage in it, it actually is an invitation to actually participate in the illusion, the Maya, and get invested in the miasma.
Yes.
Things.
Well, it kind of goes, you got different levels. This reminds me of YouTube videos that are like 10 levels of how to make a steak or something, right? And
Right.
so this is, it comes in different levels. So there's the first level where it will just dawn on you the next time you're in a conversation and people start to gossip. You'll see it. And it can be small. It can be like, oh, did you hear so-and-so went on vacation? Da, da, da. And you'll realize in that moment, oh, wait, here's a conversation of gossip, and I'm not going to participate. I won't add to that.
More actually, interestingly, and more often, gossip is also divisive speech.
It is. It is.
It's the whole point is to say, let me tell you the dirt about so and so.
Yeah.
You know what the score is, right?
It'd be so
And
simple.
all it is just sowing discontention into the community.
And then you have idle speech in terms of like, if you come on retreat, we don't sit around gabbing at lunch. We try to avoid that. You'll see the monks do that. They don't talk when they're sitting and eating. So rather than sitting and just yammering away and not paying attention to your food, you pay attention to your food. You pay attention to eating. You pay attention to what's going on. So idle speech is also something that just pulls us away from what's happening and into that fantasy realm, like you're saying. Whereas, curbing that, noble silence being its opposite, you're present and you're aware and you're mindful and you're not just yammering along. So yeah, that's a good superpower to have. Yeah. Anybody else? Anything else strike anybody from the list of stuff?
I would just offer this, that the Eightfold Path is, as you brought out and showed us, it's not a continuous line. It's not linear. And as a matter of fact, it's a wheel. And it's an 8-spoked wheel.
Yep.
And like all wheels, it's continuously turning and turning and turning. And each time that wheel makes contact with the earth, there is, at that point, there is a spoke that is opposite of it as it makes its contact. And each of those spokes is one of the items on the Eightfold Path. And usually in the beginning, for most of us, and particularly those that aren't aware of the Eightfold Path, that wheel is spinning so fast, they don't see the spokes. Mm-hmm. And then as we practice and we get further and deeper into our practice, and we begin to realize and understand, we begin to, the wheel starts to slow down. And then we start to see each individual spoke. Yeah. And as we see the spoke, we take action.
Yeah, because we're given these rules of thumb to take that action, right? They're pretty simple rules of thumb. That don't cause suffering and do what you can to raise good conditions. Like that's the rule of thumb. And it's so practical that it meets life right where it is. And it doesn't have judgment in it the way that, other traditions do. In fact, it makes karma pretty easy to understand. Because he's not saying here that like you're being punished, but he does introduce intention. So he says, with good intentions, you'll create better circumstances in the future. Not you're going to go do this thing, and because I was mean to my neighbor, the universe is going to punish me by me getting in a car accident. Like, that's not it. Because you're mean to your neighbor's feelings were hurt. Your feelings were hurt. You guys stewed on that. It ruined your relationship. It caused a lot of suffering. That's pretty bad. That's karma, right? So there's good result of good and bad actions, and ways to move something to that more peaceful existence. So it gives you an option. Who else? Victor, what you got? You got a smile on your face. You must have something to say.
I'll have to go back over your slide on right effort. I mean, I always thought of it as, ardent and alert, self-motivating, kind of setting intentions before a meditation period. But it seemed like your slide that I'll have to go back over again had a little different meaning to it.
Well, this gets to some nuance, but let's take a look at it. Let's see. Right effort. Okay. Right effort, right exertion, proper effort. And what is right effort? There's the case where monk generates desire, endeavors, arouses persistence, upholds and exerts his intent for the sake of non-arising of evil, unskillful qualities that have not yet arisen, for the sake of abandoning of evil, unskillful qualities that have arisen, for the sake of arising of skillful qualities that have not yet arisen, and for the maintenance, non-confusion, increase, plenitude, development, and culmination of skillful qualities that have arisen. So clearly the call here is to put forward some energy into developing skillful qualities and letting go of unskillful qualities. When you sit with intention in your meditation, you are sitting, generating the energy and desire that meditation be of deep quality, of the four jhanas, moving towards those things. Mm-hmm. So you're setting forth that intention that you're going to be skillful here. And you also set forth that intention if you go to a business meeting and you promise you're not going to mislead the people in the business meeting. I'm going to enter this with the best of intentions because that's a skillful quality. And I think you're also, right effort is also an example of like, I'm going to build a 30-minute meditation practice in the morning and in the evening because I know that that's a skillful quality that I would like to have arise. And then once you build that practice, then you maintain it. You work hard. It's why we do these things. So that is what the Blessed One said. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's the building of maybe, of skillful intentions that are occurring now or that may occur, the building of skillful motivations to do it. Mm-hmm. Setting the agenda, the skillful agenda, not just intentions of motivating to do something well.
But this isn't a passive thing that the world is happening to me and woe is me, poor me. This is saying you can cultivate the intention of being this kind of human that is out to end suffering in yourself and others. So you can cultivate. Yeah. Eightfold Path, right? We're talking about how to live your life. So good recommendation. Anybody else got anything? It's a lot to digest. We could have gone 8 weeks on this and gone over each one at a time. We probably will. But I think the important thing to understand is that, the charge here is from this guy in India who did this thing, like Ben said. He said, he went and he did this and nobody told him what to do. But at the same time, when I sit here, now we have digested essentially the full teaching of Siddhartha, what he told you to go do for practice. And having looked at that, I don't see anywhere in there where it requires that I worship this or that I believe something that's not necessarily real, or that this isn't something that can be done because I'm not holy enough or rich enough or powerful enough or any of those things, but rather totally practical stuff that applies right to the things that I am most worried about in my life, my anxieties, my stressors, the things that I'm really trying to do something about. And here he sits 2,500 years ago, same stuff. And he says, don't be a jerk. Be nice to people. Cultivate a life where you're kind and you're not using divisive speech and you're not doing those things, and sit and practice and let go of these things and pay attention. Use these 4 foundation mindfulness to see the reality of your emotions and your body and your thoughts and the things that are actually going on with you, instead of trying to find some other outer answer that's going to fix it all, because it's not going to happen. So instead, it's right there already, right where you are, and living your life on the straight and narrow this way, in a way that's meant to ease suffering and yourself and others, is the best path forward towards making that happy space to be. And with
I
that,
would just add one more thing.
yes, sir.
Lastly, that a lot of the these teachings that you hear the Buddha teach, and he's talking to other bhikkhus and monastics, who have withdrawn from the world, and he's giving them these instructions on how to perfect their lives and follow these instructions. But you don't have to be a monk to do it.
Right, that's right.
You don't have to be a
That's
monk to do
important.
this.
He's talking about life, right?
He's
Livelihood.
talking about life. He's talking to everybody. Just so happens his audience that he's speaking to is a lot of monks, and there might be a few lay people out there somewhere in the audience, but he's speaking to all of them.
He gave
So you
talks to
do that.
everybody from every walk of life, and he
Right.
never said, well, if only you were a monk, you could do this.
Yeah.
Never happened. And he never said there's some mystical thing that you have not attained your kung fu style yet to the place where you can go do this. He never said that. He said, look at your own breath. That's what gets more profound than that. Like, I mean, really, there's lots of profound stuff in the universe, but like your own breath, pretty profound. And it's not something that requires you believe it or subscribe or any of those things. It's applicable to everybody, whether they think of themselves as Buddhists or not. And it's the thing going about the business of, grown-upping, and doing grown-up stuff. So it is something we all deal with. I think that's about what I have for today, gang. But this is deep stuff. So next week we'll conclude. We have the last little teeny tiny bit of text that I've saved for last in the conclusion, and it's my intention to try to recap all of the things that we've talked about next week in an overview, and then open this up to more discussion. So you've all been part of this journey. We've all done this together, and you've all done a thank you very much for letting me sit here and ramble about this thing that I love so much. Now, as I always do, I'm going to share our service presentation, and we'll conclude with our reflections on universal well-being. May we abide in well-being, in freedom from affliction, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may we maintain well-being in ourselves. May everyone abide in well-being, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may they maintain well-being in themselves. May all beings be released from all suffering, and may they not be parted from the good fortune they have attained. When they act upon intention, all beings are the owners of their action and inherit its results. Their future is born from such action, companion to such action, and its results will be their home. All actions with intention, be they skillful or harmful, of such acts they will be the heirs. And we will conclude with salutation to the Triple Gem. Araham Sama Sambuddho Bhagava Buddham Bhagavantam Abhivademi. Sawakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namasami. Supatipanno Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho Sangham Namami. Hope you all have a great weekend. And I hope this has been helpful this week. You got 8 folds to practice with. So bring your intent and your mindfulness, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.